Hello, my dear students. Welcome to the session number 12 of our module Developmental Psychology 2, Adolescence and Adulthood. This class is scheduled for the April 19th. You have until that day to look at what we are discussing in this class and to prepare the assignment that I'm planning asking you to do. As you know, this April 19 is a very important day for me. Today is exactly the day in which I celebrate my 25th wedding anniversary. So I hope to see you on the 19th for a brief discussion early in the morning here in Portugal. But meanwhile, let's go to the contents of this class. Today, we will continue talking about elderly perceptual and motor development. We'll continue some topics for this area of development that we started last week. And we will have a very brief introduction to the topic of elderly's cognitive development. As usual, I put here some vocabulary that might be important for you. And before the class, you might want to check the Chinese version of these words. So, to continue talking about physical development in elderly, today I want to talk a little bit about health and wellness and life expectancy and longevity. As you can imagine, the moment we are reaching late adulthood, the topics related to health starts to be more and more important. We have aspects related to secondary aging that might affect the life of people in this period of development. First of all, many physical disorders might start to appear. The most common and typical physical disorders that might appear in late adulthood are heart disease, cancer, and stroke. And indeed, about 3/4 of people might die from one of these problems: heart disease, cancer, and stroke. Another important physical problem that appears regularly in late adulthood is arthritis, which means an inflammation of one or more joints, and this can affect very hard the quality of life of people, with many constraints, not just to move from one place to another, but also to conduct very basic activities in daily life, and many times also creating chronic pain. Indeed, arthritis and chronic pain can be a very important factor to decrease quality of life in late adulthood. As I told earlier, stroke is one of the most common physical disorders, and that is related to hypertension or high blood pressure. And if this is not treated, can indeed be very serious, and is one of the aspects that late adult people and their relatives, that people are caring for them, needs to be particularly attentive. But in late adulthood, there are also psychological and mental disorders that might affect significantly life of elderly people. One particularly important aspect of mental health in late adulthood is major depression. We will talk about that in the next class when talking about psychosocial development, because indeed in Macau, as we will see next week, in Macau, major depression is a very, very important aspect. So we will spend a bit more time talking about this next class. But in late adulthood, we might also have episodes or cases of dementia. This is the most common mental health disorder of the elderly, and it includes aspects like memory loss and a decline in other mental functions. So dementia is something that might appear and make the person to have significant constraints also in their everyday life. Finally, another important mental health disorder that might appear with age is Alzheimer. Alzheimer is much more serious because it is a progressive brain disorder, so it starts slowly and it is degenerative, so it will get worse, worse, and worse. And besides loss of memory, it creates confusion. This loss of memory might affect even the sense of self and the identification of people around them. People with Alzheimer, at some point, they might forget who they are and who are the people around them. So when we have people with Alzheimer, indeed, there is a need for a broad psychosocial intervention to give support not only to the person but to all the family, because it's very hard to manage the life of the elderly person, but also of the caretakers and the family and the relatives of people living with them. There are a couple of films on about this Alzheimer. How Alzheimer can affect the life of people, and I recommend one that is The Father with Anthony Hopkins. If you can watch it, it is indeed a very touching and powerful film that I recommend you to watch. In order to prevent these physical problems and mental health problems, as I already told you, it's important to have uh, an active life and to actively promote good health on the elderly. And the three main aspects to have a good health in elderly are to eat a proper diet, uh, so to continue having advice from medical doctors or someone from nutritionists about the proper diet for elderly is something that we should promote every time. Second, to keep doing exercise. And as I told you, for me, this is something surprising in Macau. That's why I put here this picture with people outside in a park in Macau using these equipments to do some physical exercise. I have the clear sensation that elderly people in Macau, has more physical exercise than most of people of the same age around the world, and that should be a very interesting study for people who would be interested in doing research about elderly people. And finally, in order to have a good health, of course, to avoid threats to health like smoking or even alcohol consumption too much. So these three aspects are very important to promote a good health. So to be active and to keep moving is a very important aspect for elderly. We don't have to do this exercise, but um, I think I ask you to think about this. What really motivates older adults to improve diet and exercise patterns? Because if you work with them, if in the future you'll be working with them, what do you think that could be good motivators to make them to have a healthy lifestyle? What strategies you as a counselor or psychologist in the future could use in order to improve physical activity in the elderly? How could you promote that motivation? This is something that I would like you to think about it and pay no attention. I might ask this on the exam. Um, and I found a very interesting paper from 2016 talking about uh, this topic, and highlighting two main aspects that might contribute for physical exercise in the elderly. First, motivation, and second, confidence. So, the most important motivation should be health concerns. This study highlights that elderly are more motivated to do physical exercise when they have health concerns. Um, or to have a good quality, a good and appropriate lifestyle. So if they have a doctor, someone tell them that there are health problems that oblige them to have specific activities or specific behaviors, more motivated. And based on that, the anticipated benefit. So, what are the benefits that I will have for having this lifestyle, including doing more physical exercise? And the study is showing that when they anticipate more benefit for doing that, they will have a better lifestyle and more active life. Finally, confidence. So if they feel confident that they will be able to do properly the physical activities or the activities that they will have to perform, the probability of doing it will be higher. And for that, past success encourages future attempts, which means that those elderly who already had experience in the past in having this type of physical exercise, they will feel more confident to do it now in the future. And second, if there are plans organized and structured and feasible, showing that it's possible to do it, the confidence for them to increase will also, the confidence to do it will also increase. As you can see, these aspects that I identified are clearly related to the theory of planned behavior. It's very interesting that this theory can explain many human behaviors, and there are many studies showing how this theory can be applied to the promotion of physical exercise among the elderly. And I know that you already talked about this theory in other courses, and as you know, there are three main aspects that contributes to the intention to have physical exercise. First, the attitudes that the individual have towards that behavior. So the attitudes that each person, each elderly person has about physical exercise. And that is what I just told you, that those who have a past experience about that, those who can identify benefits in having this physical exercise, they will have more positive attitudes, contributing to a higher intention to have this behavior of physical exercise. But the second aspect will be subjective norm, which means the norms of the society, of the community about physical exercise in this case. And I think that in Macau, indeed, we have lots of positive contributions of the subjective norm to the intention of doing physical exercise among the elderly. My view is that this collectivist society creates the idea that is expected that elderly meet in the morning to do physical exercise and to have positive behaviors to promote a health lifestyle. And I can see even that the government, with all the support that with the Sports Bureau gives to the elderly and the access, how they stimulate with even a token system. I know that with this card from the sports bureau, elderly can have points and gifts for having physical exercise. So all this general idea that is created, that is expected that elderly people will do exercise, and the collectivist idea of Asian societies for conformity is very positive for elderly to keep doing exercise. And finally, the third aspect of the theory of planned behavior is the perceived behavioral control, in which way elderly believes that they will be able to do physical exercise and to overcome obstacles that they might identify in the process to do physical exercise. When I'm saying these obstacles might be something like, oh, because it's too far away, I don't have a proper place where to do that, or the facilities are always occupied, or I don't have transportation to go there. So when elderly identify obstacles and they believe that they cannot control or overcome those obstacles, the intention to do that behavior will be clearly affected. And indeed, this aspect of having an intention to do something as a factor that affects the behavior is particularly important for elderly. And as I told you, the studies for physical exercise in elderly shows that most of the elderly tend to find obstacles to perform physical exercise, and because of that they found that they don't have much personal control on the behavior. Indeed, there is a tendency to find some excuses not to do physical exercise, and when we are in a position of taking care of them, we need to prevent giving them excuses not to do it. And indeed, this is particularly important because studies are showing that the intention to do physical exercise is typically reduced with age, exactly because they believe that they are no longer capable of perform physical exercise the way they used to do when they were younger. And the studies are showing indeed that in the case of elderly, the intention to do physical exercise is much more important, has a higher contribution to the behavior than what happened when we were younger. And among all of this, the research shows that social interaction is the main reason for joining an exercise program. When you find the expected benefits of joining physical exercise, interestingly, these benefits are not only related to physical health. For instance, I will do physical exercise because that way my heart will work better, or I will move better in the future. So the expected benefits are mostly related to the opportunity of connecting with others. It's really interesting that the main motivation that is reported, the main benefit of having physical exercise reported by elderly is related to, with this I can meet people and I can connect and I can have more social interactions. So Motabelli, in this paper that I also find relate with application of the theory of planned behavior to physical exercise in elderly, shows that indeed subjective norm and perceived behavioral control are the strongest determinants or factors in the exercise intention and behavior among elderly people. So it's not just a question of improvement of attitudes, but it's mostly in the case of elderly people uh, uh, of working on these two aspects, the subjective norm, and I believe that this subjective norm in Macau should not be a huge problem, but mostly the perceived behavioral control uh, in order to create um, good reasons and not to give excuses for elderly not to do physical exercise. And with this, we can prevent we can promote a healthy lifestyle and make people live longer. Well, but the fact that we can help as psychologists to motivate people to have a healthier lifestyle and that will help them to live longer, that doesn't mean that people will not die. And indeed, death is part of life. And if we talk about physical development of human beings, we have to assume that the physical development of human beings will finish with death. So there is one important question, which is why people die. And there are two main theories, just for us curiosity. There are two main theories explaining why people dies. The first one is the genetic program theories, basically explaining that for any human beings we already have written in our DNA that in our genetic code that there is a clock that starts counting and that there is a time limit for the reproduction of our cells. So, because that is or should be already defined in our time clock, in our genetic code, it's already programmed that human beings will die at some point. And this, as you can imagine, is related to senescence or primary aging. Well, but there are also what are called the wear and tear theories. These three theories explains that the moment we are born, we start a process of deterioration of our body. To live means to produce toxins, breathing and burning oxygen, all this fuel that we use while we are living, will start the process of deterioration. And indeed, as a physical body subject and exposed to different threats in everyday life, but most of that acting and living like an engine, there is a natural deterioration that is a consequence of using our functions and our body, and that will lead us to the end of this engine that we have and to death. So death indeed will happen to everybody. But the question is, how long can we live? The studies, uh, when we compare ourselves with other animals, we can see that uh, we are not that bad in terms of the time that we can live when comparing to others. For instance, a chimp can live around, the eldest chimp that was identified could live around 59 years old, and in the case of human beings we can live, or the eldest human being that could survive, the longest that a human being could survive was 122 years. But as you know, not many people will reach this age. That's why there is the concept of life expectancy of human beings. The life expectancy is related to how many years is expected the person to live in the year they are born. Uh, and at this moment, Macau is in the second place around the world. only Monaco is ahead of us with a life expectancy of 84.46 years. Uh, this is related to the fact that both Monaco and Macau, we are very small populations, so the population is not huge, and we are a place with a high GDP, with wealth way of living, with good health services. So with a small sample of people living in a small community with good health services, is expected that life expectancy would increase. But as you can see in this graph, the life expectancy of human beings is increasing with the development of science and with increasing of health services and more awareness of what should be a proper way of living. The life expectancy is increasing in the last years, and we expect that will continue increasing. Interestingly, one of these days I saw a paper saying that some scientists expect that by 2030 human beings will already find the solution for eternity and to overcome death. I have my doubts about that. But indeed, what is being identified is that people are living longer and longer, and that's also why, as I already told you in one of the last classes, that is also why the increase of retirement age is more than justified. But that's also why the population is getting older, and because of that, it makes sense to think for the countries, the cities, the communities, to think on how what to make these people that are getting older and are a higher percentage of population, what to do to make them being active, useful for the community, and most of all, how to make people to live longer, but with quality of life. Because the fact of making people living longer, if it is not to have quality of life, doesn't make much sense. So this is a huge challenge that humanity has. We could and we are being able to make people live longer. Great. But are we able to make people living longer with quality of life? And I think that psychology can and should give an important contribution for that. Okay, so finishing physical development, let's talk a little bit about cognitive development. I will not talk much about cognitive development in the elderly. Indeed, my main concern is to make you understand that it is always possible to stimulate and to promote cognition and mental functioning among elderly people. We already know that there are skills or abilities, intellectual abilities, that will decrease in late adulthood. We already know that. We already know that not all the abilities will decrease in late adulthood. As you can see in this graph, for instance, numeric abilities are those who are decreasing, who have a highest decrease and faster. But for instance, verbal abilities, this blue line on the top, are those that are kept in a higher stage and which decrease is lower. So we can always have proper interventions to reduce the decrease of intellectual functioning among elderly, and we psychologists can have and give a proper contribution to that. So, as Martin Feldman says, with a proper stimulation, practice, and motivation, older people can maintain their mental abilities. And this is very important to take into account. Most of the time, the mental or intellectual abilities decrease fast because of the changes in the environment too. Because people start to be more passive, they lose habits of keeping their mind working, they decrease. So it is possible to keep stimulation. And there is one important aspect is that elderly people, they are retired. If they are retired, they don't have to work. If they don't have to work, they have time. And the most important idea is to help them to use time in a productive way, in a stimulating way, so they can keep their mental abilities the longest they can. And using time in this active way, stimulating way, can help to increase quality of life. So this is the main idea that I want you to keep. We psychologists, we caretakers of elderly people should focus on keeping people being active and use their free time in an active way so they can maintain their mental abilities. That's why the task, I ask you to do this task 21 that is called Cognitive Stimulation Program for the Elderly. I will share with you some references. You can find other references that you want, and what I want you to do is to create a program, to make a brief PowerPoint presentation on what to do to promote cognitive development in elderly. Imagine that you are working in an NGO, in a center for elderly people, and your purpose as psychologists is to prescribe activities, specific activities to elderly to make them keep or promote cognitive skills. I put here some suggestions of references. I just did a brainstorming to give you some references. Some of the references will be shared on Google Classroom, so you can access these references on Google Classroom, but you can also find any other source that you consider relevant, important for you. What I want you to do is to prepare a PowerPoint presentation. This is the task 21 on Google Classroom, and on the 19th, as you can see in the session plan, each of you will have around 5 minutes just to highlight the main ideas of your program. So what I want is to focus in specific activities, a program of things that we can propose or prepare for elderly to promote their cognitive development. So please prepare this